I'm going to say something that might be a bit triggering for anybody who has experienced a relationship recently or had a relationship end of any kind. It could be platonic, romantic, familial, whatever. I'm going to say something that's going to be a bit triggering. You saw them as you wished they were, not as they actually are. I think that's so important for those of us who struggle with recognizing the truth of a person versus our desire for who we want them to be, the fantasy we have of them, and maybe even limerence at times when it comes to romantic relationships. You might have an idea of who you want this person to be that you're projecting onto them based on maybe your fears, your expectations, what you need to feel safe in your own life, putting it on them. And then when they don't live up to that, you are feeling as unsafe as you were trying not to feel by creating these fantasies and projections. You're creating your own lack of safety. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy because you're not seeing them as they actually are. You're seeing them as you wished they would be. And they might not be that person. They might never be that person. And I think it's really important to separate yourself from the potential you see in someone because it will always leave you disappointed. You'll always feel unsatisfied in that dynamic if you're seeing them as you wished they were. And it can be really difficult when you're in these relationships, again, romantic, platonic, familial, whatever, to separate yourself from that because sometimes you might see you as an extension of them or them as an extension of you because you're connecting, you're in relationship with someone. And that, as I've learned from my own experience through therapy, through the work I've done, is a sign of enmeshment. You have become enmeshed with this person thinking that you are both the same, one and the same, not realizing that you begin somewhere and end somewhere and they begin somewhere and end somewhere and you are different entities. It can be really hard to understand that when you are in an enmeshed dynamic where maybe you're people pleasing, they're people pleasing, or you're people pleasing to the point where they don't have to people please as much. And there's this imbalance of the connection. That can be really difficult then to separate yourself and not be in the enmeshment cycle because you've given so much energy. You're constantly giving energy. That is the dynamic now. That's the expectation. And so you're giving all this effort and energy in the hopes that this person will be who you envision them to be. And they might have inklings of that. There might be little pieces of the person that you want them to be in their behavior, right? You might be seeing it in their behavior, but they're not coming to full fruition because that might not be who they are. And maybe you don't want to accept that because to accept that would mean you don't get what you truly want in this life. You don't get the kind of relationship with this person in this way that you truly want. But really, what's happening there is that you're choosing that, right? You're deciding that you don't get that kind of relationship by engaging over and over again in a relationship that is unsatisfying. And when you do that, you are reinforcing the belief that you don't deserve that kind of relationship because that's all you're showing yourself. You are deciding for you that you don't deserve that kind of relationship, the kind of relationship that feels good for you, that's aligned, authentic, exactly what you would want. And obviously, nobody is perfect. No relationship will ever be perfect, and it won't always match the fantasy you have in your mind, right? We all have to compromise and decide what our sacrifices are going to be. We're going to have to sacrifice something no matter what, right? There's always a compromise. But finding a relationship that is as aligned as possible for you in ways where you can sacrifice or compromise on things and it won't feel like a loss. But if you are feeling like you're abandoning very important parts of yourself to continue this dynamic or relationship, that'll always feel unsatisfying and it'll convince you that that's what you deserve, that that's all that's in store for you as a person, because that's what you're showing yourself. So on the one hand, we can't control everything in life. There are many things in life we cannot control. And those things we just have to accept. But there are also many things in life that we don't realize we have control over, but we do. And one of those things is what we decide to show ourselves, the perception we have of ourselves, and then the actions we take that reinforce that perception. That's within our control. So that is affecting how you see yourself and then what you do and the people you allow into your life. That's in your control. You can decide to change that. It might not feel like that in the moment, especially if you've been in that enmeshed relationship and dynamic and you've been overgiving, people-pleasing, overstepping your boundaries. You've convinced yourself that this is all that you have and you're reinforcing it. You're programming yourself over and over again to feel like this is all that you can have. But really, it's about deciding to see people as they actually are and to separate your worth from their truth. Who they are, how they show up, what they choose to do, how they choose to treat people has nothing to do with you, your worth, and your value in their life or anyone's life, because you're separate entities. And how someone treats you is not a reflection of whether or not you are worthy or deserving of being treated well. That's just how someone shows up. And I'm not even here to say that somebody is right or wrong, good or bad. Like, there is no definitive answer to these things because there's nuance to all of these discussions we have about relationships. How someone shows up is how they show up. You get to decide how you perceive it and how you view it and how you feel about yourself in relation to it. That's all in your control. And you can choose to leave that. Obviously, not easy. Easier said than done. And sometimes it's so much harder to get out of those relationships and dynamics when you have been so toxically attached to them, of course, right? This isn't to shame anybody for being in those cycles for longer than they would like, of course. But when you notice that this is often tied to a perception you have of this person, maybe you're sticking around in the hopes that they'll become the person that you wished they would be finally, right? That potential keeps you stuck there because it's very alluring. But potential, it doesn't always have a promise attached to it, right? Potential is an unfulfilled promise. And if it never becomes fulfilled, then there's nothing actually there. When you realize that, it can be so much easier than to detach because you understand that this is all within your mind. And your mind is a very powerful tool. Our imaginations are very powerful and we can use them to our benefit or to our detriment. And sometimes we use them to our detriment without even realizing it. And one of those ways is how we view other people and how we believe they should be behaving in relation to us or in life in general. You have this idea, this image, this projection of this person, who you want them to be, how you want them to show up. And if they don't show up that way, you feel like it's tied to your worth, that you're not good enough, that you have to do better, be better, or you have to force them to be a certain kind of person. And when they aren't, because that's just not who they are, you feel like you can't control anything and that this is all you can have and all you deserve. But you're seeing your control in a place where it doesn't belong. It's not there. Your control is actually somewhere else. It's in the way you perceive and are open and aware of things in your life. That's where your control lies. Not in how you control another person or what you decide for them to do or how you decide that they behave. That you can't control at all. It's all about how you view them and whether or not you accept their truth and their reality as your own reality and your truth, right? That's the only way that you can understand if this person's aligned with you or not. Seeing them for who they are, believing what they tell you or how they behave and seeing it and accepting it. What they show you is who they are. And making sure that actions match words, because when there's a discrepancy like that, the lack of clarity is the clarity, right? If you're trying to understand if a person is one way or this way or that way, but they're saying one thing, doing another, that's who they are. They are the discrepancy. They are somebody who doesn't understand that their words and actions have to match all the time. And that's not for you to fix. That's not for you to try and make sense. That's for you to just observe and then decide how you feel about it and how it's going to make you feel about yourself. That's it. There's nothing more you can do. So I think it's really important for anybody who gets trapped in these cycles and relationships. I am one of these people, and you don't realize it until afterwards, right? In retrospect, you see it and you're like, oh yeah, I did that thing again, or I got trapped in that cycle again. I think it's really important to check in with yourself. If you notice that you're in this right now, or you're out of it and you're trying to, make sense of everything, ask yourself, am I seeing them, or was I seeing them as they actually were, or as I wanted them to be? And, it can be kind of sad. There might be some grief to accepting that you saw them as you wished they were, not as they actually were. I think it's also important to understand that not seeing them for who they are isn't a very kind thing to do. It's actually kind of disrespectful to do to anybody in life, right? Not to really see them for their truth. I think it's really important to recognize that as well, because we can sometimes get trapped in our own egos, in our own desires, and forget that part of how we're showing up for people is important too, right? It's important, yes, how they show up for us, how they treat us, of course, but also how we show up and treat them and whether or not we are seeing them for who they are. That's a really respectful thing. That's part of respect, right? Am I honoring this person by accepting their truth? And if you're not, and again, this isn't to blame or shame, it's more just for you to also hold yourself accountable, because that's an important part of these dynamics too. If you never hold yourself accountable, you're always going to get stuck in them. It's not going to be good for you. It's not going to be good for the other person. The other person's never going to meet your expectations. You're always going to feel disappointed in those relationships, and you might lash out in ways that you might not realize in the moment. That's not healthy either. So it's important to hold ourselves accountable too when we realize that we're doing this, that you're seeing somebody as you wish they were, not as they actually are. It's not very respectful. It's not very kind. It's not kind to them, and it's not kind to you, because then you stay in this relationship and dynamic when it's not aligned, in the hopes that that person will be that fantasy version of them that you're imagining or hoping for, and they might never be. So what does that mean for you? And what does that mean for them? Does that mean they're going to have a partner or a friend who never truly sees them for who they are? That's not very kind and respectful. And does that mean you're going to have to be in a relationship that doesn't feel genuine, authentic, or aligned for you? You're not getting what you actually want from this relationship. That's not very kind or respectful to you. So when you recognize that your perception of this person is not true, maybe your ego is clouding your perception because it wants this person to be a certain way to make you feel better about yourself, you realize how much power and control you have over the way you see yourself. And that is the most important thing to be able to control, right? You have to be really mindful and aware of how you're choosing to see yourself and who you're choosing to attach your self-worth to and why, right? Why can't that self-worth stay in your own hands? Why does it have to be projected onto somebody else or put in the hands of somebody else to decide for you, right? Why are you revoking your ability to choose for yourself? That's a really important question to ask and figure out where it stems from. So I always recommend journaling. I think that's a great practice to really dive deeper into these things. If you want to learn more about these topics, I write a lot over on my Substack. I explore these in more depth. I also post my short form videos on TikTok and Instagram, and I also offer one-to-one calls for anybody who's interested in chatting a bit more about these things. I'm not a therapist, as I always say, and what I do is not therapy. It really is just us exploring these topics in a way that is, informative, entertaining, enjoyable, and through the methods that I use in my videos and the work I do. So if you're interested in any of that, feel free to check out my website. All the links will be in the description below. Thank you for listening, and I'll be back again soon with another episode.